Before ink touched parchment, before letters danced across illuminated manuscripts, and long before the modern glow of digital screens, humanity relied on memory alone. The earliest societies were bound together by stories whispered around fires, songs that carried history across generations, and oral traditions that passed wisdom from elders to the young. Yet memory, so vital, so fragile, was always at risk of fading. Words could be forgotten, meanings could shift, and truth could fracture with time. For thousands of years, memory was fleeting. It existed only in the breath of a storyteller, the rhythm of a chant, or the lines of a poem recited by heart. With every death of an elder, an irreplaceable library of knowledge was lost. Humanity needed a way to defy forgetting, a method to anchor thought beyond the limits of flesh and bone. And then, somewhere between river and desert, amid the mud-brick temples and crowded streets of Uruk, something extraordinary happened. Humanity found its answer. Marks pressed into clay became symbols, symbols became words, and words became the architecture of memory. Here, in the world's first true city, writing was born, not as an artistic flourish, but as a practical necessity to govern, to trade, to pray, and to remember. This was the dawn of human memory made permanent. No longer would stories vanish with the storyteller. No longer would numbers dissolve with time. Humanity had forged a tool that could outlast generations, a way to leave behind not only voices, but identities, laws, and dreams. Uruk's invention was not merely a step forward, it was a turning point that altered the trajectory of civilization itself. For the first time, memory was no longer fragile. It was immortal. And from that immortality flowed history, culture, and the very essence of what we now call civilization. In the vast cradle of Mesopotamia, between the winding arms of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a city rose from the plains, Uruk. To the people of its time, it was not merely a settlement. It was a marvel unlike anything the world had seen before. Long before Rome claimed grandeur, before Athens dreamed of democracy, before Babylon built its towering gates, there was Uruk, humanity's first metropolis. By the dawn of the 4th millennium BCE, Uruk had transformed from a modest village into a sprawling city. Archaeologists estimate that at its peak, the city may have housed 50,000 to 80,000 inhabitants. An astonishing number in an age when most communities numbered only a few hundred. Within its massive walls, stretching nearly 6 miles in circumference, life pulsed with unprecedented intensity. At the core of this bustling metropolis stood 2 monumental districts: the Eanna precinct, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, and the Anu district, crowned by a white temple devoted to the sky god Anu. These were not simply places of worship, they were centers of administration, culture, and innovation. Towering ziggurats reached toward the heavens, their stepped platforms a symbol of humankind's ambition to bridge earth and sky. The temples were more than religious monuments. They were economic engines. Farmers brought grain to the temple granaries, shepherds delivered sheep to the temple pens, and artisans crafted goods for offerings and trade. The temple acted as both marketplace and archive, requiring careful records of goods exchanged and labor performed. This administrative complexity would demand something new, something revolutionary, that would soon emerge as writing itself. Uruk's scale brought challenges that no human community had faced before. Streets needed maintenance, water channels required management, and fields demanded regulation to ensure the city's survival. Coordinating thousands of farmers, builders, and traders required more than memory and spoken word. The birth of large-scale bureaucracy was taking shape. In Uruk, specialized labor flourished. Farmers, priests, merchants, and artisans formed a web of interdependence. Potters fired standardized vessels, brickmakers molded sun-baked clay for construction, and merchants connected Uruk to distant lands, from Anatolia's metals to the lapis lazuli of Afghanistan. Uruk was not isolated, it was a hub of exchange, linking diverse regions into a proto-global network. Legend credits the mighty Gilgamesh, Uruk's semi-mythical king, with building the city's colossal walls. While archaeology cannot confirm the exact truth of this tale, the walls themselves were real. Impressive fortifications of mud brick that embodied the city's power. For the Sumerians, the walls were not just defenses. They were a statement, a declaration that here was a place destined to endure. Within those walls, Uruk became a living experiment in urban life. Crowded homes lined narrow lanes. Workshops buzzed with activity. Markets overflowed with goods. And above all, the temples loomed as both spiritual and political centers, reminders of the divine authority woven into every aspect of civic life. What made Uruk revolutionary was not simply its size, but what size required. The demands of managing resources, recording debts, organizing workers, and codifying rituals pushed human society to its intellectual limits. Oral memory could no longer sustain the weight of complexity. Something more permanent was needed. The city itself was the incubator. Without Uruk's scale, writing may never have been born, or at least, not in the form that would shape civilization for millennia. Uruk was not only the first metropolis, it was the laboratory where necessity sparked invention, where survival gave rise to record-keeping, and where humanity's oldest city laid the foundation for humanity's oldest words. The story of writing did not begin with words, but with numbers. Long before scribes etched symbols onto clay, the people of Mesopotamia had developed a clever way to count and account. Tokens. As early as 8000 BCE, thousands of years before Uruk's rise, farmers and herders across the Fertile Crescent used small clay objects to represent goods. A sphere might stand for a sheep, a cone for a measure of grain, a disc for oil. These simple objects were more than trinkets. They were the earliest accounting devices in human history. When a shepherd delivered 10 sheep to the temple, 10 little clay spheres confirmed the transaction. When a farmer brought sacks of barley, cones tracked the amount. These tokens allowed trust to extend beyond memory. They created a physical record that could be stored, checked, and verified. In essence, they were the prehistoric ancestors of ledgers and receipts. By around 3500 BCE, as Uruk swelled in size, tokens grew too numerous to manage on their own. The solution was ingenious. Tokens were sealed inside hollow clay balls called bullae. Once sealed, the contents could not be tampered with without breaking the clay. To ensure transparency, scribes began pressing the shapes of the tokens onto the outside of the bullae before sealing them. This way, anyone could see what was inside without breaking it open. A revolution was brewing. The marks on the bullae were no longer just impressions of objects. They were beginning to function as symbols. Representation was moving away from physical tokens and toward abstract recording. The leap came when the people of Uruk asked a simple question: why keep the tokens at all? If impressions on clay could stand in for the tokens themselves, then the clay alone was enough. Around 3200 BCE, scribes flattened slabs of wet clay into tablets and pressed symbols directly onto the surface. Grain was represented by a simple mark, sheep by another. Instead of storing hundreds of tokens, they now stored ideas captured in durable clay. The tablet replaced the token. Writing had begun. The earliest tablets from Uruk are not works of literature or poetry, but records, lists of grain rations, livestock tallies, and tax payments. They may appear mundane, but they represent a staggering leap. The movement from physical counting to symbolic writing. Each mark was a promise that what was written could stand in place of what was real. A line on clay was no longer just a line. It was a sheep, a sack of barley, a laborer's wage. Reality could now be captured in symbol, stored for generations. In the crowded corridors of Uruk's temples, these tablets became indispensable. Priests recorded offerings brought by worshippers. Administrators tracked the distribution of food and labor. Merchants logged debts and agreements. For the first time in history, memory was no longer bound to human recall. Clay preserved it. A transaction made today could be verified tomorrow or even a century later. Memory had become external, objective, and, most importantly, permanent. This shift from tokens to tablets was more than administrative convenience. It was the first spark of abstraction. Humanity had learned to detach thought from the physical world and encode it into symbols. Without this leap, there would be no poetry, no laws, no history. The clay tablet was not merely a tool, It was the womb of civilization, carrying within it the unborn potential of literature, philosophy, and science. From simple counters came the foundations of epic stories. From humble cones and spheres came the architecture of thought. And from the tablets of Uruk, a flood of human expression would soon pour forth. Around 3100 BCE, scribes in Uruk refined their tools. Instead of scratching pictographs with sharp reeds, they cut the reed stylus at an angle and pressed it into the clay. This produced distinct wedge-shaped marks. From the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, modern scholars named the script cuneiform. This small change transformed everything. The wedge was quicker to press than to carve, allowing scribes to write faster and with greater consistency. Thousands of impressions could now be made in an orderly fashion, paving the way for a standardized system of writing. At first, cuneiform signs resembled the things they represented, a drawing of a fish for fish, a jar for oil. But over time, the pictures grew simpler, more abstract. A fish might be reduced to a set of strokes, barley to a few wedges. More importantly, scribes began to use signs for their sounds, not just their meanings. A picture of a reed could stand not only for reed, but also for the syllable associated with the word. This phonetic use of symbols marked a profound breakthrough. Writing was no longer chained to physical objects. It could capture speech itself. By 2800 BCE, cuneiform was capable of expressing entire sentences. Clay tablets recorded not only rations and debts, but also personal names, titles, and instructions. For the first time, human thought, complex, nuanced, and sequential, could be frozen in time. A contract might state, "On the 12th day, so-and-so delivered 10 sheep to the temple of Inanna. Witnesses, so-and-so and so-and-so." Suddenly, agreements could be fixed beyond dispute. The spoken word no longer vanished into air. It became law etched in clay. The uses of cuneiform exploded. Administrators tracked land ownership and labor. Priests recorded hymns, rituals, and offerings. Merchants inscribed contracts and correspondence. Kings proclaimed decrees that would outlive them. And then came the unexpected. Cuneiform leapt beyond administration into storytelling. Myths, proverbs, and epics began to appear on tablets. Humanity's imagination had found its first canvas. Among the earliest masterpieces to emerge from cuneiform was the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale rooted in Uruk itself. In this sweeping narrative, Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, seeks immortality after the death of his companion, Enkidu. Though he ultimately fails to conquer death, his legacy endures, ironically through the very medium that made him famous: writing. Through cuneiform, the voices of storytellers, priests, and kings of Uruk carried across millennia. The clay tablets immortalized their fears, hopes, and dreams. What Gilgamesh could not achieve in life, immortality, writing achieved for him in memory. Cuneiform was more than a script. It was the infrastructure of civilization. It created contracts that stabilized economies, laws that governed cities, literature that bound cultures, and religious texts that guided faith. It also transformed power itself. Kings could now project their authority across vast lands through written decrees. Priests could ensure rituals were performed exactly as prescribed. Merchants could enforce agreements across distances. Writing became an instrument of control, continuity, and cultural identity. But writing was not for everyone. In Uruk, literacy belonged to an elite, the scribes. Trained in the aduba, the tablet house, scribes spent years mastering hundreds of signs. They copied lists of words and names, memorized sign combinations, and learned the art of pressing wedges with precision. Scribes were not merely record keepers. They were guardians of knowledge, intermediaries between rulers, gods, and people. To hold the stylus was to wield power. Power to shape history, power to preserve memory, power to make words eternal. By the time cuneiform reached maturity, it had become far more than a tool of Uruk. Neighboring cities and cultures adopted it, adapting the script for their own languages. Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all built their civilizations on the foundation laid in Uruk's clay. What began as a way to track barley rations had become the language of kings and gods. From the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, human civilization emerged with a written voice, a voice that still echoes today. Among Uruk's most celebrated sanctuaries was the Eanna precinct, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, deity of love, fertility, and war. Here, priests and priestesses performed elaborate rituals, offering sacrifices and gifts to appease the goddess. Yet the temple was not only a spiritual space, it was a bustling economic institution. Temples in Uruk functioned as both houses of worship and centers of administration. Farmers brought their grain to the temple storehouses. Shepherds delivered livestock. Artisans produced goods in workshops owned by the temple. In return, the temple distributed food, wages, and resources. The scale of this operation was immense. To sustain such a system required careful management, numbers tallied, goods recorded, labor organized. Oral memory alone could not maintain such complexity. And so, in the dimly lit rooms of the temple, among the prayers and hymns, scribes pressed styluses into clay. The earliest surviving tablets from Uruk are temple records, lists of offerings, inventories of grain, tallies of livestock. To modern eyes, these may seem mundane, but to the people of Uruk, they were sacred documents. A tablet did more than record a transaction. It carried divine authority. If a priest declared that 10 sheep were given to Inanna, the tablet ensured that declaration lived forever. If a farmer owed a measure of barley, the clay preserved the obligation. Writing became a covenant between humans and the divine, a means of guaranteeing that promises, duties, and rituals would not be forgotten. Inside the temple precincts, scribes worked tirelessly. These men, sometimes women, were not ordinary laborers. They were highly trained specialists, often attached to the priesthood, who served as intermediaries between the gods and the people. For them, writing was more than a job. It was a sacred calling. Each stroke of the stylus carried spiritual weight. To inscribe a tablet was to participate in divine order, to fix the will of the gods into clay. In this sense, scribes were not mere clerks, but keepers of cosmic balance. Religion and administration were inseparable in Uruk. The act of sacrifice, for example, was both spiritual and logistical. When worshippers brought animals to the temple, priests performed the rituals, but scribes recorded every detail. The type of animal, the date, the giver's name, the portion dedicated to the deity, and the share reserved for the temple staff. The same was true of festivals, construction projects, and land ownership. Writing transformed ritual into record, ensuring that divine law and civic law were one and the same. In Uruk, the tablet was as holy as the altar. It is little wonder, then, that Mesopotamians believed writing itself was a gift from the gods. To them, no human mind could have invented something so powerful. Later myth spoke of the Tablet of Destinies, a cosmic object that gave control over the universe to whoever possessed it. Writing was imagined as a tool of divine authority, entwined with fate itself. This belief elevated the role of writing far beyond practical record-keeping. It made the act of inscribing clay a sacred gesture, one that bound heaven, earth, and humanity together in lines of wedges. Within Uruk's temples, thousands of tablets accumulated, archives of grain deliveries, labor records, hymns, and prayers. Each tablet was a fragment of human thought preserved in clay, stored in the temple's chambers for future generations. The temple was therefore not only a religious sanctuary, but also the world's first library. In its walls, knowledge was collected, safeguarded, and transmitted. Uruk's priests and scribes created a living archive that outlasted its creators, ensuring that their voices would echo across millennia. For the people of Uruk, to write was itself a form of devotion. Just as incense rose from the altar, the etched lines of a tablet carried prayers and pledges to the divine. Writing was both tool and sacrifice, both record and ritual. In this union of temple and tablet, humanity found not just a way to count its wealth, but a way to sanctify memory. Writing was holy because it was permanent, and permanence to ancient eyes was divine. To the people of Uruk and the wider Mesopotamian world, writing was not seen as a clever human invention born of clay and reed. It was too powerful, too transformative, too mysterious to be regarded as the work of ordinary men. They believed it had descended from the heavens, a divine gift bestowed upon humanity by the gods themselves. In the myths of Mesopotamia, writing was intimately tied to the cosmic order. Stories speak of the Tablet of Destinies, a sacred object that granted supreme power to whoever held it. The god Enlil, ruler of the winds, was said to guard this tablet, for in its inscribed lines lay control over the fates of both gods and mortals. Whoever possessed it could decree destiny itself, bending the course of the cosmos through the authority of written word. Such myths reveal the awe with which Mesopotamians regarded writing. To them, inscribed symbols were not merely marks on clay, they were forces of creation, instruments of divine will. This reverence was not confined to one city or one people. Across the ancient world, writing was so astonishing, so unlike anything that had come before, that many cultures ascribed it to divine origins. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, who bestowed hieroglyphs upon their civilization. Among the Maya, writing was linked to sacred ancestors and powerful deities who revealed it as part of humanity's covenant with the supernatural. Again and again, different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, reached the same conclusion. Writing could not have come from human hands alone. For the Mesopotamians, this belief elevated scribes to an exalted status. Those who could write were not merely administrators or record keepers. They were mediators between mortals and gods, entrusted with the sacred responsibility of inscribing fate into the clay of the earth. When a scribe pressed his stylus into a tablet, he was not just recording a transaction or a hymn. He was participating in an act of cosmic importance, echoing the role of the gods themselves who inscribed the laws of the universe. This perception shaped how writing was used and preserved. A list of offerings to Inanna was not just an economic record. It was a holy document, a binding covenant between worshipper and deity. A royal decree inscribed in cuneiform was more than law. It was the voice of the divine channeled through the king. Writing's permanence gave it an aura of immortality, and in that permanence, people sensed the hand of the gods. And yet, even as modern archaeology uncovers the human origins of writing, tracing its evolution from tokens to bullae to tablets, the ancient claims hold a certain truth. For what invention has reshaped humanity more profoundly than writing? What tool has allowed us to preserve our past, define our present, and dream our future? In the eyes of those who first witnessed the miracle of words etched into clay, the divine was the only explanation. To call writing a gift of the gods was not just myth, it was recognition of its unparalleled power. For in giving humanity the ability to write, Uruk and its scribes had indeed given the world something godlike, the power to make memory eternal. For centuries, the origins of writing remained cloaked in legend. Ancient peoples spoke of gods gifting humanity with the ability to inscribe thought upon clay or papyrus. Later, civilizations inherited the script without remembering its first breath, and scholars of the classical world puzzled over where the written word had truly begun. The answer, like so many secrets of early civilization, lay buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. In the 19th century, explorers and archaeologists descended upon the ruins of the Fertile Crescent, driven by whispers of forgotten empires. Among the broken ziggurats and crumbling palaces, they unearthed tens of thousands of clay tablets. These artifacts, silent for millennia, bore the wedge-shaped impressions of cuneiform. At first, the tablets were undeciphered mysteries, their marks mistaken for decorations or patterns. Yet as scholars painstakingly unlocked the script, they realized they were not holding the products of a single culture's golden age, but the earliest records of human memory itself. The tablets told a story that stretched back before Babylon, before Akkad, before Sumer's rise to kingship. Layer by layer, archaeologists uncovered a timeline of symbols evolving over centuries. At the deepest levels of Uruk, in levels now dated to around 3200 BCE, they found tablets that looked strikingly different from later cuneiform. These earliest texts contained no complex grammar or flowing narratives, but lists, grain allocations, livestock tallies, distributions of beer, rations for workers. The writing was primitive, restricted to pictographs and numeric systems, but it was unmistakably writing. And it was older than anything else the world had seen. What proved decisive was not only the tablets themselves, but their connection to the earlier systems of tokens and bullae. Archaeologists discovered caches of clay envelopes containing both sealed tokens and early impressions, bridging the gap between counting objects and true written symbols. Here was the missing link. Writing had not appeared suddenly, fully formed, but had evolved step by step out of practical necessity. The story of Uruk's scribes was no longer legend. It was supported by evidence pressed into clay over 5,000 years ago. Other contenders emerged, of course. In Egypt, the beauty of hieroglyphs suggested an independent invention, one that appeared around the same time as Uruk's tablets. In the Indus Valley, inscriptions carved into seals hinted at another system of symbols, perhaps used for trade. In China, the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty revealed yet another early script. But when scholars compared the dates, one fact stood out. The earliest cuneiform tablets from Uruk predated them all. Egypt's hieroglyphs came a century or two later, the Indus inscriptions centuries after that, and China's earliest characters emerged more than a millennium later still. This evidence transformed Uruk from a forgotten ruin into the cradle of human literacy. The city had not only built the first great metropolis, but had also given humanity its first script. From its scribes flowed a river of symbols that would shape law, literature, commerce, and history itself. Every alphabet, every library, every contract signed in ink today traces its lineage back to those clay tablets buried beneath Uruk's soil. And yet, the quest to prove the origin of writing continues. Scholars still debate whether Egypt developed its script independently or under Mesopotamian influence. They question whether the Indus symbols represent a true language or merely proto-writing. They wonder how ideas traveled across lands and centuries, reshaping themselves in the hands of new civilizations. But the evidence remains clear. In the shadow of Uruk's ziggurats, in the workshops of its scribes, humanity first cracked open the door to the written word. To prove this origin is not merely to resolve an academic puzzle. It is to understand the very foundation of civilization. For writing is more than marks on clay. It is the record of our past, the guarantee of our present, the promise of our future. And that promise was first born in Uruk, when reeds cut into wet clay transformed human thought into something permanent, something enduring, something eternal. From the moment symbols were etched into clay, writing was never neutral. It was not simply a way to record goods or keep memory alive. It was a tool of power. In Uruk and the civilizations that followed, literacy meant authority. Whoever held the stylus held the keys to control. In the bustling streets of Uruk, most people could not read or write. Farmers, herders, craftsmen, even merchants often relied on memory, voice, and trust. But in the temples and palaces, scribes bent over their clay tablets, wielding their styluses with quiet precision. These men, trained for years in the demanding scribal schools, held knowledge that ordinary citizens could not access. They translated speech into symbol, voice into permanence. They became the gatekeepers of information, and in doing so, they became indispensable to rulers and priests alike. The temple economy thrived because scribes could track the flow of grain and livestock with accuracy no human memory could match. Kings issued decrees that spread across their lands not as fleeting words, but as written law, carved into clay or stone. Soldiers and laborers obeyed commands carried far beyond the reach of a single voice. Writing gave authority permanence, and permanence gave it weight. What was spoken might be forgotten, but what was written endured. Writing also allowed rulers to project their power beyond their lifetimes. A king's laws, a temple's hymns, a city's treaties could outlive their creators, binding generations to promises and traditions. In this way, writing became a weapon against time itself. Through inscribed clay, rulers achieved a form of immortality, but power was not only in the hands of kings. Priests used writing to claim divine authority, recording myths and hymns that affirmed their gods and their temples as the center of the universe. Scribes, in their quiet mastery, could shape the very memory of a culture, deciding what was recorded and what was left unsaid. Writing gave them influence that far exceeded their station, for they were the custodians of civilization's memory. Yet writing also bound people together. Treaties between cities could be inscribed and sealed, creating trust where suspicion might otherwise reign. Trade expanded because contracts could be recorded, debts noted, promises made binding. Writing could command armies, but it could also weave societies into cohesive wholes. Still, beneath this utility lay the stark truth. Access to writing was restricted, controlled, and often jealously guarded. To write was to wield power, and power was rarely shared freely. In Uruk, as in the centuries that followed, writing reinforced hierarchies. It served the rulers and the priests, while the vast majority remained outside its reach. Literacy was privilege, and privilege meant dominance. This relationship between writing and power has echoed through every age. From royal decrees carved into stone stelae, to religious texts guarded by priestly classes, to laws codified in libraries and courts, writing has always been more than communication. It has been command. And so, in the dawn of Uruk, humanity not only discovered how to preserve its voice, it discovered how to shape its destiny. Writing was memory, but it was also might. It was the unseen hand that could organize, control, and dominate. In the wedge-shaped strokes of cuneiform lay the first lesson of civilization. That power is not only enforced by armies or wealth, but by the written word. The story of writing did not end within the walls of Uruk. What began as simple impressions on clay tablets soon spread, carried by merchants, priests, and travelers across the Fertile Crescent. The wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, first pressed into Uruk's wet clay, became the building blocks of civilizations yet to come. From this modest city, the idea that thought could be made permanent traveled far and wide, transforming human society in ways that no one could have imagined. As Uruk's influence grew, neighboring cities began adopting its system of writing. The Sumerians' innovations spread along trade routes, reaching the distant lands of Akkad, Elam, and later Babylon. Each region adapted the script to its own language, expanding its flexibility and reach. Writing ceased to be a local tool. It became a technology of empire, a method to organize people, resources, and beliefs over vast territories. With writing came administration. Laws could now be codified, contracts enforced, and inventories maintained across cities and generations. Cities could communicate with one another, sending records of trade, agreements, and diplomacy. The written word allowed complex societies to function on a scale previously unimaginable. Clay tablets, once the preserve of Uruk's temples, became the engines that powered governments, economies, and culture. But the influence of writing was not limited to bureaucracy. It transformed thought itself. Stories could be recorded, myths could travel, and knowledge could be preserved beyond memory. Epic tales like that of Gilgamesh carried ethical, philosophical, and spiritual lessons across generations. Scientific observations, from irrigation methods to astronomy, could now be shared and refined. Knowledge became cumulative, building upon itself in a way that oral tradition alone could never achieve. Even the concept of history was born from writing. By recording events, rulers, and deeds, societies could remember themselves. The past became a tangible, examinable reality. Writing allowed humans to measure time, to commemorate victories, and to mourn losses. Civilization could now reflect upon itself. The ripple effect of Uruk's invention extended far beyond Mesopotamia. Its influence can be traced in the development of Egypt's hieroglyphs, the Indus script, and later alphabetic systems. Each borrowed the principle that human thought could be encoded into symbols, stored, and transmitted. Clay tablets may have seemed humble, but they carried the seeds of cities, kingdoms, and empires. From Uruk's temples to distant capitals, writing became the invisible architecture of civilization. It was no longer merely a tool of memory. It was a tool of organization, communication, and cultural continuity. Civilization, as we understand it today, is inseparable from the invention of writing. The ability to externalize thought, to record, and to transmit knowledge transformed humanity from scattered communities into structured societies capable of unprecedented achievement. In essence, clay became more than a material. It became a medium through which humanity could reach beyond itself, leaving behind a legacy that endures to this day. Uruk's contribution was not just local or temporal, it was universal. In the wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay thousands of years ago, The blueprint of civilization itself was etched. For all the evidence pointing to Uruk as the birthplace of writing, history is rarely simple. Scholars and archaeologists have long debated the origins of the written word, questioning whether Uruk truly deserves the title of civilization's cradle, or if other cultures independently arrived at similar breakthroughs. These challenges do not diminish Uruk's achievements, but they complicate the story, revealing that human innovation is often layered, convergent, and sometimes mysterious. One of the primary points of debate concerns Egypt. Hieroglyphs appear roughly contemporaneous with Uruk's earliest cuneiform, and some suggest that Egyptian scribes may have developed writing independently. Unlike the abstract, wedge-shaped marks of Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs maintained pictorial fidelity, linking images directly to meaning. Some argue that Egypt's complex religious and administrative systems could have driven the invention of writing without influence from Mesopotamia. Others suggest trade and cultural contact might have transmitted ideas across the Sinai, allowing Egyptian writing to evolve from Mesopotamian concepts. Further afield, the Indus Valley civilization presents another puzzle. Inscribed seals discovered at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro contain symbols that appear highly systematic, yet scholars cannot definitively decipher them. Were these true writing systems, encoding language in the same way as cuneiform, or sophisticated accounting marks for trade and ritual? The debate highlights a fundamental question. What constitutes writing? Is it the ability to record numbers and transactions, or must it convey abstract thought and speech? Uruk's tablets clearly meet the criteria, but the existence of other proto-writing systems challenges the idea of a singular origin. Even within Mesopotamia, Uruk's primacy has been examined critically. Excavations at nearby cities such as Jemdet Nazr and Tel Brak reveal early signs of administrative record-keeping and complex urban life. Some argue that writing may have developed gradually across a network of cities rather than emerging solely in Uruk. The boundaries between invention, necessity, and cultural diffusion are fluid, reminding us that history is rarely neat. These challenges do not erase the significance of Uruk. They underscore it. By examining alternative possibilities, scholars illuminate the broader human context in which writing emerged. They reveal that Uruk's scribes were part of a larger tapestry of experimentation, adaptation, and cultural exchange. Writing may have multiple roots, but the earliest surviving examples, the step-by-step evolution from tokens to tablets, and the thriving scribal culture of Uruk collectively make a compelling case for the city as the foundational site of literacy. Beyond archaeology, some challenges come from interpretation. Ancient myths claim writing as a divine gift, while modern researchers seek evidence-based explanations. Reconciling these perspectives is itself a challenge. How does one honor human ingenuity while acknowledging the cultural and spiritual context that gave writing its profound significance? Uruk demonstrates that invention is never purely mechanical. It is social, religious, and deeply human. Ultimately, the challenges to Uruk's narrative remind us that history is a conversation, not a verdict. Archaeologists, linguists, and historians continue to unearth evidence, debate timelines, and refine interpretations. Each new discovery, an earlier tablet, a sealed token, a forgotten archive, can shift our understanding. Yet amid the debates, one truth endures. Uruk represents the first city where writing transformed from practical record into the foundation of civilization, a place where humans first made memory permanent, and in doing so, changed the course of history. Today, Uruk lies in ruins, its once mighty walls reduced to crumbling mud brick, its ziggurats weathered by millennia of wind and sun. Yet even in silence, the city speaks. Beneath the soil, in museum archives around the world, clay tablets and fragments bear witness to the brilliance of its scribes and the ingenuity of its people. Each wedge-shaped mark is more than a relic. It is a bridge connecting the modern world to the dawn of civilization. The legacy of Uruk is everywhere, though often invisible. Every alphabet, every ledger, every digital record echoes the principle first realized on its clay tablets, that human thought can be externalized, preserved, and transmitted. Our ability to communicate across space and time, to build complex societies, and to record history rests on the foundations laid in Uruk. Without those first tablets, Cities might have remained ephemeral settlements, and memory itself might have been fragile and fleeting. Uruk also offers lessons about power and knowledge. The scribes who controlled writing wielded authority that extended far beyond their immediate surroundings. Their work reminds us that literacy and information are instruments of influence, shaping culture, governance, and economy. Today, this lesson remains strikingly relevant. The flow of information, the preservation of knowledge, and the ability to record events continue to define societies, just as they did in Uruk 5 millennia ago. Moreover, Uruk is a symbol of human creativity and resilience. Its citizens transform necessity into innovation, turning simple clay into the medium for civilization itself. In a world where survival often demanded ingenuity, they invented a tool capable of defying time: writing. Through it, their voices, hopes, and accomplishments endure. Gilgamesh still walks among us, not as a figure lost in legend, but as a story immortalized in ink and clay. Modern archaeology and scholarship continue to uncover new facets of Uruk. Every excavation, every deciphered tablet, reveals details of daily life, commerce, governance, and spirituality. The city's legacy is thus not static. It is continually reinterpreted, renewed, and reimagined. Uruk teaches us that the origins of civilization are complex, layered, and deeply human, and that even the oldest achievements continue to shape our present and future. In the broader human story, Uruk stands as a testament to the transformative power of innovation. It reminds us that great cities are not built solely from brick and stone, but from ideas, memory, and the capacity to record and transmit thought. Writing, born in the mud and fire of Uruk, remains the ultimate legacy, a gift that allows humanity to remember itself, to connect across generations, and to create civilizations capable of enduring far beyond the lifespan of any individual. Uruk may be silent today, but its voice resonates everywhere. It speaks through the written word, through the preservation of memory, through the very fabric of human culture. The city that once thrived along the Tigris and Euphrates reminds us that civilization begins not only with walls and temples, but with the courage to leave one's mark, to make memory eternal, and to transform clay into history. From the bustling streets of Uruk to the silent tablets preserved in museums, the story of writing is the story of humanity itself. It is the story of a people who looked beyond the limits of memory, who refused to let time erase their deeds, and who transformed clay and reed into instruments of permanence. What began as humble tokens and simple impressions grew into cuneiform, the first true script, capable of recording not only goods and labor, but thought, speech, law, and imagination. Uruk teaches us that memory is not merely a faculty of the mind. It can be externalized, structured, and shared. The city's scribes, working in the shadow of ziggurats and temples, understood that each tablet pressed with their stylus was a bridge across generations. Through writing, human experience could survive famine, war, and the slow decay of time. They made memory eternal. The legacy of Uruk extends far beyond Mesopotamia. Every legal code, every ledger, every book and digital archive traces its lineage back to those wedge-shaped impressions in wet clay. Civilization itself is inseparable from the invention of writing, for with it came administration, culture, storytelling, and the ability to imagine futures shaped by knowledge. Even in our modern world, where words flow across screens and voices are captured instantly, the same principle holds. Writing remains the greatest tool for preserving thought, asserting power, and transmitting culture. It allows humanity to learn from its past, to communicate across continents and centuries, and to build societies that are more than the sum of their parts. Memory, once fragile and fleeting, became enduring. Ideas, once ephemeral, became permanent. Through the genius of Uruk's people, clay became a vessel for civilization, and writing became a gift that transcends time. In that gift, humanity discovered not just a tool, but a promise, that we could leave a trace of ourselves, speak across the millennia, and make memory eternal. Uruk may be ruins today, but its achievement endures. The first Metropolis, the first scribes, the first tablets, they remind us that history is not only lived, but recorded. that civilization is not only built but remembered, and that the human desire to leave a mark is eternal. Memory pressed into clay is humanity's greatest testament, and through it, Uruk's voice continues to speak to us across 5,000 years, reminding us that to write is to endure, and to endure is to be immortal.